All right. Hello, everyone. So, I have gotten a few questions about what's going on with the whole thing happening in Ukraine, the war between Russia and Ukraine right now, and what's going on with that, what my take is on all of it. And I wanted to take an opportunity, take a few moments today, make this recording and explain what is going on. So, first and foremost, you need to understand something very, very clearly, right? So, the website I'm on right now is one I've already shown you guys a few times. It is called Live Maps. This one specifically, liveuamap.com, UA being the abbreviation for Ukraine. Um, and what you need to understand about this whole situation is historically speaking, for hundreds of years, the state of Russia controlled from the city of Moscow, their traditional capital, controlled much of the area of modern day Ukraine, right? So when Vladimir Putin, exactly a week ago today, almost to this exact moment, um, when he issued his statement to the Russian people on Russia Today, their state run media, he had stated, and I quote, the state of Ukraine was completely created out of Russia and by Russia, right? And he went on for throughout a 40-minute or so or hour long speech, stating how Ukraine was made basically from whole cloth out of Russia by people in Moscow to give people over there a national identity, as opposed to the actual reality of it, which was the Ukrainian people had that cultural and had that national identity long before it was a recognized region of the USSR, as Vladimir Putin was stating. So he went on to state in his speech that the Ukrainians were, in fact, Russians and they belonged in Russia. And the reason why this is such an important point, and one that I am incredibly disappointed that so few people on the national and international stage have pointed out, is these are, and I'm not afraid to say it, genocidal terms. When you start claiming that these people are actually in this cultural group, you need to ask yourself the question, what happens when they refuse to be, right? What happens if we were to look at Canada and state they speak English and they have very many of the same kind of cultural practices as we do? They're basically American, and we invade, and the Canadians say, no, we're Canadian, we're not American, right? What do you do with the people who say no? Same thing with all Spanish speaking countries as well. And I can go on to other issues of history that reflect the same exact thing, and what happens when people say no to assimilation into another state, regardless of similarities between culture. So, almost a week ago, Thursday night, heading into Friday, you had Russia actually begin its invasion, and it began here in a border crossing between Crimea and the rest of Ukraine proper. So, to give you a little bit more background on that, back in 2014, Russia had occupied Crimea and this area here known as Luhansk and Donetsk. Right, Luhansk is in the north, Donetsk is in the south here, and this was in reaction to the Ukrainian people tossing out their corrupt government that was basically a puppet of Russia, right? So that is something you really need to understand, is Putin is doing more than just trying to grab at land here. He is really attempting to regain political and economic influence over a particular area. Plus, the Russian population is somewhere around, I believe, 100 million. Correction, about 144 million, whereas the population of Ukraine is about 43 million, right? So Ukraine has about a third, less than a third of Russia's total population. But that, if Russia had succeeded in this invasion, and I'll get more onto what their hopes and intentions were with this invasion, but had they succeeded in this invasion, um, they would have added almost a full third onto their nation's population, which is significant. The United States population is somewhere around 350 million, right? I think last time I saw it was about 330 million. So they would have immediately jumped themselves forward in that. So Putin is attempting to place his mark on history, rebuild a Russian empire nearer to its historical borders, and continue to assert Russian influence and dominance on the international stage. And that is another important thing here is Russia and the West variably led by different countries, used to be countries like France, then it was England, now it is us here in the United States. And Russia has been consistently kind of aligning itself against different countries in the West throughout the past century since Russia became kind of a world player after Peter the Great. Um, we'll talk more about him in class, don't worry, for my world studies guys. But going on from that, Putin is just the latest iteration in this westward focused assertiveness on the international stage. And Putin is attempting to continue to assert this dominance because Ukraine has been attempting to petition NATO to allow them to join. The problem with that is there is this provision in NATO that states if a country is under imminent threat of war, they cannot be admitted because then that could be seen as almost like an offensive or an escalatory action by NATO, right? NATO is supposed to be a defensive alliance. So if it allowed a country in that was about to be in war, it could be seen as kind of like an offensive kind of move. So we have all of these issues here where this was ostensibly begun because Russia is claiming that Ukraine is genociding Russian-speaking people, that it is aggressing towards Russia. It might try to attack or invade at some point. Might try to forcefully retake the regions of Luhansk and Donetsk, which had declared their independence. Again, they're Russian influence in Russian-occupied areas. So Vladimir Putin invades. The Ukrainian people, for their part, are now literally fighting for their survival. They have had their entire identity, their cultural and political identity, challenged by a foreign power. And that is not insignificant, guys. It is not insignificant. Imagine if another country were to deny, say, the United States of political or cultural existence. That is a massive deal, because then you are basically calling into question the existence of these people as they have chosen to live, or as they always have lived. I'm sorry, not chosen, but always have lived. So when Russia invades, that is basically an ultimatum in and of itself to the Ukrainian people. Are they Russian? Are they going to sit by and allow the Russians to occupy and welcome them in, either willingly or unwillingly? Or are they going to resist and dig their heels in on every inch of ground and not allow this foreign invader to take them? Thankfully, the Ukrainian people have chosen option number 2. Now, the reason why this is so significant, guys, is the fact that Vladimir Putin is an authoritarian dictator. Many people have stated that, Ukraine isn't perfect either. It has its own problems. It has its own issues and corruption, and they're not a perfect democracy. Well, number 1, name for me a single perfect democracy on the planet. I'll wait. Number 2 is, which would you rather have? A country that is getting closer to the West and democratizing and improving itself on grounds of corruption, or a country that falls to this authoritarian dictatorship and just gets absorbed by them, allowing one of the most evil men in the world to gain in more power? Right? Yes, Ukraine is not perfect, but I say that the world stands a whole lot of better chance of allowing Ukraine to fix its issues by winning this war, or after winning this war, as opposed to just saying, screw it, who cares? We'll just consolidate the bad, right? That makes no sense whatsoever. So what happens when Russia invades is it's seen for the crisis that it absolutely was. The total strength of the Russian military is a little over 1 million men, whereas for the Ukrainian military before this started was 267,000, but they've since mobilized another 100,000 to bring it up to 367,000. And the Ukrainians have shown themselves to be anything but an entirely vulnerable people. So let's look at what happened. So one of the first things that actually happened was, aside from the regular and reserve military of Ukraine standing its ground, and let's be clear, they're the ones doing the most of the fighting. The regular Ukrainian people were mobilized as well. They formed basically civilian militias. They were given weapons by the Ukrainian government, which, on a side note, I think is pretty awesome. And number two, basically, the Ukrainian government was issuing out directives on how to make Molotov cocktails. So the Russian military was not just being put up against the Ukrainian military, which is doing extraordinarily well, but they're going against an entire populace, right? So they are the Russian military, as it has been moving through, has been being torn apart. Now, as someone with a little bit of military experience, I can tell you that what I see from this is these Russian armored columns. This is a destroyed tank, right? I can't tell what kind of tank it is because it is so destroyed, but it may be one of the T-80 series or something like that, T-70, T-80 series. But even the latest T-90s in the Russian military are being destroyed as well. And as someone with military experience, I can tell you that, not this video yet, actually. I can tell you that the thing that the US military and our allies train most on is what happens when the S hits the fan, right? If you train on the plan and exactly how that plan is supposed to go from beginning, middle to end, and you never really focus on what happens when that plan goes belly up, you're not going to know what to do when you're downrange and S hits the fan, and you now need to adapt and improvise and try to overcome whatever kind of obstacle is in your way. And that's really all the US military focuses on. Some guys might be like, well, like, we have our mission and we go out and we conduct it. It's like, yes, you have the mission and you're told where you're going, but what happens when you actually get to that objective is always up in the air. That is never specifically planned for beyond basic doctrine, right? Now, what I've seen from the Russian military here is they have these hundreds of thousands of troops and they're putting in men after men after men, right? And what you can see here are these long, thin lines going in here, trying their best to get to Kiev. Kiev, which is, zooming in here, right here, some people pronounce it Kiev, same place. I'm going to keep pronouncing it Kiev. There were these reports that it had been surrounded, but that was actually Russian propaganda. They had hacked into the mayor of Kiev's Twitter account or something like that and issued a fake tweet. But the fact is, the Russians keep trying to push forward and they keep getting stopped cold, right? They even get into the outskirts of Kiev and they are stopped cold, both by Ukrainian military forces who have been training with NATO and the rest of Europe for years. I had the privilege of training with Ukrainian soldiers back in the summer of 2017. One of them actually gave me their flag patch, which was cool. And these guys are awesome. They are really, really good. And the idea behind these mass joint training sessions is to train for exactly this moment, right? So as the Russians are advancing in, they are far overextending their own supply lines. They're leaving their own vehicles, their own men, vulnerable to attack from any direction. So what happens eventually, oops, wrong tab again. I don't know which of my tabs are which here. I'll find it later. But what ends up happening is images like this, tanks being destroyed by, either RPGs, which I have a video of later of a BMP getting hit, by Javelin missile systems, which I was a Javelin gunner, and that is a fantastic, a very simple weapon system. I could probably teach you guys how to use it in 30 minutes. I won't because you don't need to yet. Joke. But The Russians have shown themselves an inability to adapt and react on the fly when a plan goes wrong. The entire plan from the very beginning was that the Ukrainians would not be strong enough to resist, the people would be too afraid, and that it would just be either crowds welcoming them in or crowds being too scared to come out of their homes as Russian tanks come rolling in. And why wouldn't they be afraid? The massive Russian army and the stereotype of wave after wave of men coming in that you cannot stop was assumed to be enough. But the other thing that has happened here is Ukraine has not given up control of the skies. This is a photograph of at least who they are claiming is this man named the Ghost of Kiev. He's a Ukrainian fighter pilot who, as of now, has 14 flight kills on his record, meaning he is nearly what you call a triple ace. In order to be a flying ace, you need to get 5 confirmed aerial kills on another aircraft. And he has 14. So this man, in combination with the rest of the Ukrainian Air Force, is keeping the war alive. The war is on their shoulders. In modern warfare, ever since the Second World War, if you lose control of the skies, you may very well lose the entirety of the war. And Ukraine is keeping control of the skies over major areas, including Kiev and other major cities. The only city that I know of right now that has been taken by the Russians is this city over here, Kupiansk, Vuzlovi. I probably completely butchered that, so I apologize. Which allegedly the mayor had given up. He had surrendered, and he's now being accused of treason by by the Ukrainian government. So that's a significant development. But the only place that Russia has actually made any gains has been in the south, and that has been very, very slow. Um, if you've been keeping track of this as much as I have, which I doubt it because I've basically been using every waking moment to keep track of it, the areas that Russia initially took, they've only somewhat widened it. They've widened their little slivers and consolidated more. But the deeper they try to push in, the less resources they're going to have. There are reports of Russian troops begging Ukrainian people for food, begging Ukrainian people for fuel. And the Ukrainian people tell them one of two things: either one, F off, get out of my country, which I can respect. Number two is, okay, we will give you food if you put your, if you lay down your arms, if you surrender to us, let us lock you up, and we'll call the Ukrainian government. So to give you an idea of more of this kind of style of resistance, this year, and I'm not going to do audio so I can speak over it, that's a Russian armored vehicle. These things are covered completely in steel and other forms of armor. And what you see here is probably more than 100 Ukrainian citizens tossing Molotov cocktails at this thing. I don't know if that vehicle ever came out. This is what you can call basically a drive-by Molotoving, where you just have regular Ukrainian people. She ends up perfectly fine. They get the fire out, but regular Ukrainian people resisting this Russian assault. You've got basically what we would call the Department of Public Works. Their highway authorities over there replacing signs so that the Russian forces get lost. It's awesome. But they're also replacing the signs with things saying like Russia, go home, Russia, go F yourselves. These, pictures of Putin's face crossed out, which I think is a wonderful use of resources. We have the Ghost of Kiev, who is a veritable hero of the Ukrainian people. And a note on that term right there, heroes of Ukraine. Right here, quick story. This is from, I believe, the first day of the war. This is Snake Island. And on this were about 13 or so men, Ukrainian soldiers, who were just basically communication, border guard kind of thing. And a Russian warship sails up and issues a message to them stating, attention soldiers, surrender and you will not be harmed, right? Or this is a Russian warship, surrender and you will not be harmed. And to give you an idea of the Ukrainian stomach for resistance, they replied back, Russian warship, go F yourselves. And they were killed to a man for it. The island was bombarded. There's been some speculation as to did they all die. There's been no communication back and forth, but the Russians never actually landed craft on there, so there's hope that maybe someone survived. But the idea is that none of them did. But President Vladimir Zelensky, the of Ukraine, has declared them to be heroes of Ukraine, which is an equal honor to being awarded the Medal of Honor here in the United States. Now, time for the other part of this as well, which is what Russia is now doing that they have been so frustrated. So that is at night in a place called, does it say it? Near Bila Tservka, which is, I want to say it's nearby somewhere, Kiev. Um, a Russian bomber jet, flew over and bombed a civilian target, right? Um, Here is a video of just regular resistance. So you've got this Russian armored vehicle trying to go into a what you call a BMP, trying to go into a Ukrainian village and demanding that they, stand down, stay calm, blah blah blah. They're being occupied by Russian forces. It turns out Ukrainian forces were there. One of them had an RPG or rocket propelled grenade and managed to launch it into there, like into them, right? And that BMP ended up being destroyed. If I had to guess, maybe the Russians got out of it before it fully caught fire. Here is a case of Russian soldiers who completely left their vehicles aside and are now basically, I don't know, walking home, walking back to base or whatever, but they ditched their vehicle, presumably their ammo, dragging along with them a lot of food. They still have their weapons, but basically you've got the Ukrainians yelling at them, take your crap out of here and get out of here, right? And one thing, if you watch any of these videos coming out of Ukraine, you will hear them chanting something called Slava Ukraini or Slava Ukraini, I've got it pretty much near there, and it means glory to Ukraine, right? That's basically their national thing. But then the other thing that the Russians are doing, other than surrendering, other than abandoning their vehicles, is bombarding civilian targets, right? Now, the people in Ukraine have been told to stay inside their homes, do not go outside, especially during the times that they've identified as being the main times for bombardment of the Russians. And the Russians are now presumably attempting to bombard the Ukrainian people into submission. This right here, guys, what you see out in the distance is apartment complexes. And I'll mute my mic really quick so you can hear it. My mic was being stupid there. So it's important to keep in mind, guys, that this is a reality. This is life now for millions of people. Thankfully, much of Western and Southwestern Ukraine has been untouched by this war. About 500,000 Ukrainians have fled from the country as refugees. But that leaves the other 42.5 million Ukrainians in the country now dealing with this. This is a picture drawn by a young girl in a bomb shelter in Chugoyev, or however you pronounce that, in Ukraine. And you just have to imagine, like, drawing is a coping mechanism, but this girl has to deal with now the rumbling of bombs and artillery hitting the ground above her head and panicking and wondering, is this going to collapse on me? It's a terrifying life, but this is not a video game. It's not a movie. We can turn it off because we're over here thousands of miles away in the United States, not under threat of war, not under threat of invasion. The threat of mass terrorist attacks is before you guys' lifetime, and I'm not one to hold that over your heads like it seems like it has been your entire lives, but The reality is we're safe here in the United States, but these people aren't just having their countries under threat, their homes under threat, their lives under threat, but their entire identity as a people as well. And I cannot stress that enough. I know I keep hounding on that, but the Ukrainian people, the idea of being Ukrainian is under threat by Russia at this moment in time. And we have to support them at least morally, at least by reaching out and saying you're not alone. But on the flip side as well, the um, Ukrainians are not alone, right? And I'll come back to this in a moment. Um, because I thought I had opened up a tab for that. I did. Okay. The Ukrainians are not alone. The EU and NATO and other countries across the world have been not only voicing their support, but issuing massive sanctions on Russia. The Russian ruble, their currency, is now like less worth than less of a cent of the on the dollar. People are having trouble getting day-to-day necessities over in Russia. Um, their ability to transfer money between countries has all but been eliminated. Germany, who has been so afraid to oppose Russia on any front, is now pulling themselves off of dependence on Russian oil and has upped their military spending to third in the world, which is insane. It's also nice to see Russia on the right side of a conflict. I mean, Germany on the right side of a conflict for once. Um, the EU is sending jets to Ukraine now. You might be thinking, why aren't we sending jets and things like that? Things like that is you have to be familiar with the vehicle system. These countries that utilize the same aircraft as Ukraine can send them over because the Ukrainian pilots won't have to be retrained. So that's a little bit of a sub note there. So Ukraine is not alone in this. And the big question that a lot of my friends and my family keep asking me is, are we going to get involved? I don't see the United States getting involved because already the situation for Russia is going so poorly that the Russian commanders and Putin himself need to understand that they are having so much trouble subduing Ukraine, and their military has been shown to be so rotten to the core that they can't hope to go up against NATO with any kind of ability to extend a war out long enough to get some kind of reasonable terms in like a semi defeat, right? You guys might have heard that Russia has been mobilizing nuclear capabilities, but that is mostly as a bluff. You need to understand that right now, Vladimir Putin is attempting everything he can to bluff his way into some kind of agreeable peace, some way that he can maintain his position in power and remain respectable on the world stage. Whether or not he can do that, I don't think he can. This has gone so poorly, and as I'm about to talk to you guys about, public opinion in Russia is plummeting so quickly that I have no idea how Putin comes out of this remaining in power. So, God willing, that happens. But I don't see the United States or NATO getting involved in this more than, say, like aerial involvement, like, conducting airstrikes to protect strategic interests, because Russia cannot risk that. No one wants to die for Putin's pride, and no one wants to destroy all of their country just for Ukraine, right? From the Russian perspective. So that's something to keep in mind here. Now, another thing to keep in mind here, a lot of people always ask, oh, why don't they just make peace? Why do they fight the war? You have to understand that when it comes to obtaining more land, obtaining more power, increasing influence, making a mark on history, and all these things, gaining more resources, making your country more powerful, being the peace-loving person is not always how you achieve that goal. So there were peace negotiations that had started between Russia and Ukraine, and they didn't really go anywhere for the first round. They've been sent back to the respective governments for more instruction and to figure out, what kind of terms that they're looking to seek. Russia is likely looking to keep and gain territory and things like that and not be seen as a defeat. likelihood of that happening is slim to none. Ukraine is going to look for Russia to completely unoccupy all of Ukraine, to include Luhansk, Donetsk, and Crimea, and probably set up some kind of buffer zone or reparation system, because hundreds of Ukrainians have died in this war already. Military and civilian combined is probably well over 1,000. So that's the state of that. Additionally, um, Russia is in such a panic mode right now that it is attempting to eliminate all talk within the country, either on social media or in the news, um, to eliminate all word of Russian casualties and Russian war crimes, right? Of Russians shooting civilians, of the shelling of civilian areas, because they understand it doesn't matter what kind of country you're in. If you start plastering all over the news that your own soldiers are killing innocent civilians, your war is not going to be very popular for very long. So, there's this bill that you can face up to 15 years in prison for talking about stuff like this. In Russia, you have these massive protests going on in places like Moscow, in St. Petersburg, over in Siberia, all areas of Russia, and the Russian police have to go in and arrest these people, dragging them out. And you have images like this circulating through not just the free world, but through Russia as well. And the amazing thing is, it happened somewhere in this video, I believe. I did see a video, and it was actually part of this same thing. I don't know why they cut it out here on Euro News. I couldn't find it again. But there was this scene where the Russian police are trying to drag somebody out, and a bunch of people come and grab her back and start resisting the police. But it is significant. The Russian people are getting out onto the streets in the thousands to protest this war, to protest their government. They know their country is lying to them. They know they do not like Vladimir Putin. We have this image here in the West that everyone is all hail Putin, all hail Putin. They do not like him. They know that he's a liar. They know he is dishonest. They know what kind of person he is. But when he's arresting and poisoning and killing his political rivals, you can't get the guy out of office. So you might be thinking, what's going to get him out of office? Eventually, he's going to be forced out, either through death, being killed, or being politically forced out, or there's going to be some kind of revolution in Russia. On the flip side as well, you also have in Belarus, who is a very close ally of Russia's, you have people in Belarus coming out in the thousands protesting the war. Also chanting the glory to Ukraine, the Slava Ukraini, the glory to Ukraine chant, basically saying, like, stop invading, stop this. We need to go back to this brotherhood of nations. We need to go back to being good neighbors. We cannot be invading everyone just for the sake of power. That's not the kind of world we live in. We need to stop this. So you have these people in these dictatorships resisting openly their dictators. And the reason why it might work now as opposed to different times in the past, is because we have the ability to get all this information out so quickly through the internet. But on the more heartbreaking note, right? The Russian soldiers, many of them are conscripts. They were people just like you and me living at home just a few months ago, until they were pulled in and brought to Crimea and brought to areas around Ukraine for what they were told as military training exercises, right? And now you have this issue of they are suddenly, without being told that they were doing it, invading Ukraine. And that's one of the reasons why this invasion has gone so poorly. None of the men going in had any idea that they were invading in the first place. So now they're going in, they're being shot at, they have to now fight the Ukrainian people. And you have exchanges like this Russian soldier finally able to take a moment to message his mother, right? His mother saying, why has it been so long since you responded? Are you really in training exercises? And he says, Mom, I'm no longer in Crimea. I'm not in training sessions. Where are you then? Papa is asking whether I can send you a parcel. What kind of parcel, Mama, can you send me? I just want to hang myself now, right? And then she responds as any mother would, "What are you talking about? What happened? Mom, I'm in Ukraine. There is a real war raging here. I'm afraid. We are bombing all the cities together, even targeting civilians. We were told that they would welcome us, and they are falling under our armored vehicles, throwing themselves under wheels and not allowing us to pass. They call us fascist, Mama. This is so hard." So you have this Russian soldier who is now struggling, not just with this invasion he doesn't want to be on, but he's being forced to kill civilians, running them over with tanks. These people who are resisting him so hard that they are throwing themselves, killing themselves, throwing themselves under tanks in order to stop this invasion. So this is weighing on, like, this soldier telling his own mother that he wants to kill himself rather than keep on doing this, right? That you have, and this is the transcript again, and you have the Russians as of 6 a.m. this morning, right, having lost 5,300 men killed in action and wounded in action. To give you an idea, an active army division, at least here in the United States, sits somewhere around 10,000 men, right? So the Russians have lost half a division worth of men. Artillery pieces, they have lost 74. They've lost 29 aircraft, 29 helicopters, 191 tanks, right? 816 armored fighting vehicles, 816, guys. Anti-aircraft missile systems, they've lost one. They've lost 291 transport vehicles. Their supply system is so bad, you've got men begging from village to village, trying to get diesel for their vehicles, trying to get food for themselves. They don't have ammunition, but they're being told forward, forward, forward. So I want to finish with this, guys. As of right now, the war is going very well for Ukraine. Ukraine is winning this war, and they have really no issues with their supply right now. They're getting in so much supplies from the Western world that they're going to be able to keep up this fight for a number of days more. But if Russia takes a single day to pause, consolidate their forces, figure out a better plan, get their men's morale up, and then make a coordinated push, I don't know how much longer Ukraine can hold out for. I have no doubts from the very beginning that Ukraine could hold, and hold very well. I thought they'd give up a little bit more ground. But again, I've trained alongside these guys. I knew they were good. I know the weapon systems that they're using, and I knew from the very beginning they'd be able to resist the Russians pretty well. But eventually, their armed forces are going to be too exhausted, and maybe their supply issues might become much worse and worse and worse. Eventually, Russia, if they're not completely crippled by supply issues and unrest at home and morale issues, they might eventually pull this up, but they still have to deal with an entire populace of 40 million plus people actively resisting them. So this still can get much, much, much worse, guys. But remember this. This is not just Ukraine versus Russia. This is not the world versus Russia. This is the world versus Vladimir Putin. This is the world versus the Russian government. The Russian people do not want this. The Ukrainian people do not want this. The Ukrainian and Russian people do not deserve this. They deserve better than what they're getting. The Russian people deserve better than the government that they have. The Russian mothers who are hearing of their children's deaths in what they had thought was a training exercise, the Russian mothers who have no idea where their sons are and are panicking because their sons were just drafted a few months ago. It's horrifying. It's absolutely horrifying on all levels. But do not sit here and say that all Russians are evil, because that's not true. Don't even sit here and say that all Ukrainians are good either, because there's going to be a lot of retributionary actions, some summary executions of Russians in this war, purely out of this kind of righteous anger that anyone like you or I would feel for someone who just decided to invade their country. This is a war more than just for the survival of the state of Ukraine. This is a war for the survival of basically everything we hold dear as a country, whether a people should be free to determine for themselves what kind of government they should have, what kind of actions it will take, and what kind of lives people should live. No, Ukraine is not perfect. Will it be perfect after this? No, but they'll be on the route to improving their country. Russia's nowhere near perfect either, but I hope and pray that they'll be able to get rid of Putin and the oligarchs and all the other people that make their government so corrupt, and actually be able to build for themselves a democracy where all people can be heard and where people can actually say that they are free. And I truly hope that this puts back into perspective the value of freedom and liberty, the ones that we talk about every day so nonchalantly, talking about being the land of freedom and justice for all, but we don't really know what that means because we've never had to fight for it like the Ukrainian people are fighting for it. So pay attention, because this is important. And eventually, even though I don't think American boots will be on the ground in Ukraine at any time, we are getting involved by supplying them, and we might get involved in the air at some point. But this is something that very much concerns the United States and the rest of the world, because China is also watching this very carefully to see how much Russia can get away with. And if they see Russia get away with this at the end, completely scot-free, if the sanctions get lifted, they might go after Taiwan. So this is important. Thank you guys for paying attention. Thank you guys for following along. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions whatsoever. But if you pray for Ukraine, pray for the Ukrainian people, pray for the Russian people as well, because they deserve it. They deserve some prayers for, hoping that not just this war ends, but so does the rule of Vladimir Putin. All right. So glory to Ukraine. Glory to the Ukrainian people. Have a good one, guys. Don't be afraid to contact me if you have any questions at all.